Hi YouTube, welcome to my channel. This is Aurelia's Bibliotech. I'm going to continue my series, judging a book by its first chapter. Today I'll be reading from A Devil in Scotland by Suzanne Enoch. This is what the cover looks like. And it was published February of this year. So let's get into it. Okay. Chapter 1, Kentucky, 1816. The bushes on the far side of the ravine rustled again. Sinking lower into his crouch, Callum McGreeth slowly unslung the rifle from his shoulder. A light breeze touched his face, moving his scent behind him away from the steep, crumbling bank. Readying the rifle, he put his fingers to his mouth and gave a low, two-tone whistle. A heartbeat later, a huge bristleback gray boar ripped out of the tangle of vines and did fall, squealing as it plunged down the steep wall and into the shallow creek at the bottom. The large jet black figure behind it stayed right on the boar's heels, growling and nipping at the pig's backside. The boar scrambled up the near side of the ravine, screeching as it caught sight of Callum, its mouth agape in impressive tusk, dripping water and saliva as it charged. Ignoring the ear-splitting noise, Callum lifted the rifle, narrowed one eye, and squeezed the trigger. The boar pinched forward into its tusk and rolled into a stop in a cloud of dirt. Then it began sliding back down the slope behind it. A second later, it splashed into the shallow creek. The black wolf, though, skidded to a halt on the near bank and followed the pig's descent with unblinking yellow eyes. Then it turned, licked its jowls, and gazed at Callum as he stood upright. "Ye could go fetch it for me," he commented, propping the rifle against the bare, clawed trunk of the nearest blue ash. When in response to that the wolf only sank into her haunches, he brushed the tips of his fingers across the coarse jet, fur running down her spine, then hopped down to the creek bed himself. Crouching again, he pulled the knife from his boot and swiftly dressed the boar before he rinsed his hands and the blade in the slow-moving trickle of water. Even without its guts, the beast likely weighed close to 150 pounds. But then the big bastard had been eating things that didn't belong to it. With a grunt, he heft the animal across his shoulders and straightened, using a small dogwood to haul himself back up to the side of the ravine. Retrieving his rifle, he set off north through the forested tangle until he reached the ridge beyond in a slightly easier terrain. 20 minutes later, the wolf appeared at his side. From the rid of her muzzle, she detoured to enjoy the boar innards he'd left behind. The top of her head just reached his hip, her long legs with the large padded paws easily matching his pace over the uneven ground, Black Death on 4 feet. "I reckon ye keen I like a challenge, Wyatt," he noted, angling toward the rising sun as the trees began to thin around them. "But next time you might look for a boar that does not weigh near twice what ye do." With a low humph, Wyatt sped into a smooth trot, entering the large clearing ahead of him. A dozen wood and stone buildings stood scattered in a loose circle, surrounded by a 20-foot tall split rail wall. Inside, amid the clatter and thump of industry, a half-dozen workers left a pile of boards and approached him. "That's the boar what's been tearing to the silo?" one of them asked, giving the wolf a wide berth. "Wyatt thought so," Callum returned, handing the animal over to a pair of lads from the cookhouse who half dragged the beast indoors. "One of them, anyway. We tracked him for 3 miles, but he did not go visiting any of his smaller pig friends. He's dinner now, regardless." "Aye, Mr. McCreeth, and thank the devil for that. At least the smaller one didn't eat as much." "Callum," Boyot called, trotting up to him. "Young Geoffrey Winter came up here before the dawn with word from his the that the damn Thomas boys are making offers from the rye crop all up and down the river." Callum shrugged. We pay better, Rory. Always have, always will." "Aye, but we dunna suggest what a dangerous territory Kentucky is or mention how easily it is for folks' cabin to catch fire, the shorter man returned. That's some good incentive there. I'll nay have that. With a scowl, Colin whistled the wire to his side and started back down the outside stair leading from the second floor rooms they shared. Send McDowell and the twins down with a reminder to the Thomas lads that they're the third set of Irish lunatics to try to take my business, and that if they done a move downriver by June, they'll find me a bit annoyed. Boyd grinned. That should do. The last time you were a bit annoyed with a lad, he ended up with a broken jaw and passage back to Bristol. He should have known better than to try passing his whiskey off his mind. How's Arnold dealing with the new lads? Alk, you keen know how gentle Arnold is. Even with that broken wing of his, he's still working them down to scarecrows. That was after he had to swear to them that you're nae some witch or demon, of course. That was nothing new. Aside from his hard-earned reputation for directness, he supposed it was like that most male McCrith. He boasted a green left eye and a blue right one. Ian had the same oddity as had their father. Not so long ago, several of his ancestors had been burned as both witches and demons because of precisely that peculiarity. These days, though, lasses seemed to find his two-colored eyes attractive. Thank Lucifer. He much preferred a roll in the bed sheets to a stake burning. As far as his men were concerned, if they thought him a bit of demon, and if that ensured their loyalty, he'd no objection. If a man's scared to work for me, he's nae a man I want working for me. They're still here. Boyd cleared his throat. Young Winter also brought up the mail from town. Even another letter. He would have preferred to continue debating whether or not he was a devil. At least the letters came less frequently these days. Put it with the others, he said dismissively, heading for the large canopy-covered slab of flat earth they'd set aside for barrel making. I can ye dunna wish to read them, Colum, Boyd said, lowering his voice as he hurried his shorter stride to catch up. But burning them's a bit permanent. Aye, that being the point, have the new mules and wagons made it up here yet? Devereaux says by the end of the week. But about the that's what comes of trusting a Frenchman. Callum interrupted. He could practically feel the disapproval coming off his forearm, and with a scowl he slowed. The letter's from Scotland, aye? Aye, it is. Is it from Crosby in Halifax? He asked, naming the firm that manages business on the far side of the Atlantic. Nay, it's from a Mr. If it's nae business, my business, I've nae use for it. Callum broke in again, annoyed that he actually rushed his response to keep from hearing the name. But anyone in the whiskey business knew to contact the Kentucky Hill Distillery through Crosby and Halifax. And anyone from Scotland who wished to contact him personally could go to the devil. Burn it, Rory, the foreman sighed. As you wish, Mr. McCraith. I'll lend a hand with Arnold. Callum decided. We'll need another dozen barrels by Wednesday. Anything to keep his thoughts away from the letters that had begun arriving about 4 years ago and what they contained, as if he had the desire to know what Ian McCree and Rebecca Sanderson McCree had a basket of barns in their ludicrous business with Duncry had netted them all the money in the Highlands. That wasn't his life, and they weren't his family. They made that damn clear. And if they deigned to offer him some sort of forgiveness, well, he fucking didn't want it. And if they'd written to send him more insults, he didn't want those either. Roy said, obviously not reading his thoughts. I can smell how nicely she's come along. The whiskey. Colum could smell it too. Corn and rye, boiled down for 3 days before it was combined with wheat and buckwheat mashed in just the right proportion. The scent reminded him of Scotland at the oddest of times, even more so than the mix of fading Highlands and Lowlands accents of most of his men. The air at the moment smelled more like a bakery than a distillery, but after 3 or 5 or 7 years, depending on the size of the barrels and the maturity of the brew, it would be some of the finest whiskey in the world. He glanced towards the large barn-like building at the center of the clearing. Hell, some of the barrels had been lying there in the dark for nearly 8 years now, and he would leave them there for another 3 or 4. For the rest, though, smaller barrels meant less time to mature, which meant fast turnaround times, faster profits, and faster growth for the place he'd named Kentucky Hills, his place. While initially he'd begun the venture mainly because it required sweat and muscle, with the bonus that it allowed him to move as far from civilization as he could get, he did appreciate the irony of it as well. Whiskey in its pursuit had ruined his life that night, so it seemed only fitting that he use it now to make himself a living, a very good living. The reputation Kentucky Hills had earned along the way for a fine, smooth brew with a unique taste that had been expected but welcomed by byproducts, as well as the reputation he'd earned for being a man with whom others did not trifle. As for the Highlands, he'd relegated it to a faraway place where he once lived for a time. The sooner it faded completely from his memory, the better. All he needed to remember about the damn Highlands was that folk there liked their whiskey. Shaking himself, he stooped beneath a roof of canvas to enter what they deemed the barrel room. A wiry, white-haired imp of unknown age stalked among the uncorked casks spaced out on the dirt, muttering to himself as he made certain they stood round and open at the bottoms like Indian teepees. Firewood lay stacked on the ground at the center of each unfinished barrel, while two younger men fitted iron ribs around another group that were already being fired. Arnold, he said, handing his rifle off to Boyd. Boyd, I hear we'll have more whiskeys than barrels to hold it. Come Wednesday, the M's face went scarlet, his good arm flapping. If the other hadn't been in a sling, he likely would have lifted it into the air to join the flock of ducks headed north toward the south fork of Red River. Ye gave me but two new lads, McCreath, both scrawny as scarecrows. Ye cannot expect miracles when ye give me shite. If ye stop yet your belly aching, Colin replied, shedding his blood-stained hunting coat. I figure I'll lend you my two hands. Wyatt snorted at one of the fires, then padded off in the direction of the cookhouse, no doubt in hope of handouts. Colin, though, rolled up his shirt sleeves and began dragging the remainder of the barrel frames into place for fire and sealing. Arnold stepped back, lifting an eyebrow. Ye can most of us need some assistance to do that, he observed. He's a damn demon, one of the striplings muttered, though Colin pretended not to hear. The barrel maker didn't pretend any such thing. A devil? Nay. What your employer is, lads, is a bloody grizzly bear. A grizzly bear.